Ladies, gentlemen, good afternoon. This is Germinal Van. Today, I would like to speak to you guys about the scientific methods and its significance and importance in cultural features. And I would also like to talk about how the scientific method is important in the economic, political, and social development of a people. For those who follow my work, they know that I am a very empirically oriented and I would say very data driven scholar. But of course, I do not believe that science can solve every issue of the human condition. Of course not. For example, science cannot prevent death. Science cannot uh, prevent death because death is part of the human condition, is a natural element of the evolution of man. The same way science can simply not prevent uh, the evolution of the human condition to keep evolving. What science does is that it predicts and explains why things are the way they are. In a way, science it's like history. So why is the scientific method important? As I said, science of course has its limits because in the world we live in, we have in fact the material world and the immaterial world. Science is mostly relevant in the material world, which means the world in which we can see, we can touch, we can taste things. Basically, the world where things are tangible. But in the immaterial world, science cannot truly do anything. That's where the limit of human knowledge uh, comes into play. Because science, in fact, is the bedrock of human knowledge. And metaphysics, which is an essential element of the immaterial world, is something that science cannot truly or cannot fully understand and explain to the human condition. But I'm going to focus here on the material world because that's where we're living. That's what we know. That's what we sense. That's what we perceive. And that's what we understand. So the scientific method, in fact, it's a tool to arrive to the truth or at the truth. Of course, the absolute truth, in my opinion, is unattainable. No one has the monopoly of the absolute truth. No one has the absolute truth. But what the scientific method does is that it gets us closer to the truth. It gets us closer to the truth by presenting the tangible things that we can see and we can analyze and we can deduct. So to use the scientific method, of course, you need to make some observations. You need to observe and do some research. And then once you've done your research, you start making assumptions about based on the research that you've done. And your assumptions, so which is your hypothesis is formed, but it is not enough. Although it is logical, very sounded, it's not enough. You need to test your hypothesis with the evidence of the real world in order to give a valid content of what you believe or what your assumptions are. And then once you test your hypothesis with the facts, with the data, with all the empirical evidence available to you, then now you can analyze the results and see if your assumption was right or wrong. So the scientific method has been used that way to advance the human condition. If we look at the history of humanity, the scientific method actually took place, I will say, in the late 15th, early 16th century. I will even say 17th century. So empiricism started with Rene Descartes, John Locke, Thomas Hobbes. So basically, during the Enlightenment era, before the Industrial Revolution. So the scientific method was, in fact, the trigger of the Industrial Revolution. When people started using the scientific method to understand the processes, the mechanisms around us, it did in fact improve the human condition. It did help us moving from point A to point B. Because if we look at, for instance, the Industrial Revolution, which happens in the 18th, 17th, 18th century, we clearly see that it was in fact a change. It was a material change of the human condition. And this material change of the human condition happened because of the scientific method, because the creation of machinery, the creation of buildings, everything that the human condition used to ease itself was used through the scientific method. In fact, the scientific method is the foundation of industrialization. So when we now look at cultures, there are some cultures that are more inclined to use the scientific method than others. There is I don't know if it's necessarily a myth, but there is a belief, a common belief that says that Jewish people were born smart, and that's why they're the smartest people in the world. Most of them won Nobel Prizes and stuff like that. What is important to understand about the Jewish culture is that Jewish culture strongly believes in the scientific method. That's all. That's the reason why Jewish people were not born with with a certain IQ already developed in the brain and that is superior to others. No, Jewish people grow up in a family that is usually involved or inclined into scientific endeavors, into intellectual endeavors. For instance, I will not say all, but most Jewish families read whether the Torah or the Talmud, and reading either of these holy books requires a substantial amount of intellectual effort to understand what these scripts are saying. So yeah, it demands like a certain level of concentration to understand those things, and Jewish people learn those things at a really young age. So when you see a Jewish person, I'm not saying it's every single Jewish person that is like that, but mainly Ashkenazi Jews. So when you see like most Ashkenazi Jews going to college, their IQ is definitely higher than the average person because they start getting into the scientific method and intellectual activities at a relatively young age. And but it's not the case for every culture. For instance, the black culture does not rely on the scientific method. And I believe this is even one of the reasons why the black civilization is still lagging. And it is something, however, that Asian, particularly, the Hans. So the Hans are the Chinese, the Koreans, and the Japanese. The Hans understood that the scientific method was the only way for them to develop their society. Let me give you a very simple anecdote. Look how funny it is that before we all used to laugh at Chinese people. When we say Chinese, we used to laugh at them. We used to associate Chinese with Kung Fu, with martial arts. Today, when you say Chinese, a Chinese person, you automatically think of someone who is a researcher, who is a computer scientist, who is a physicist. So basically, someone who is into science. What has happened? The Chinese and the Hans in general have made a shift. They move from uh, emotional activities into rational activities. And rational activities are embedded in the scientific methods. And this is one thing, for instance, that the black community has not done yet. And that is why the black community is still lagging. And it is something that Europeans, or should I say the Caucasian community, has done since the 17th century. Because empiricism was technically born in Western Europe, so that's why Western Europe was able to develop itself, because once the scientific method was used to understand the different mechanism of the world, that's when immediately the Industrial Revolution took place, and we saw how technology followed then. So today, when you look at Western Europe, North America, and Far East Asia, those regions of the world are significantly developed now, especially Far East Asia. But when you look at like when you look at southern countries, so let's go from Mexico all the way to Tierra del Fuego, so all bottom South America. When you look at from Morocco all the way to South Africa, and when you look at the Middle East and India and Southeast Asia all the way to Indonesia, all these regions of the world are less developed. Of course, even within that region, there's some countries that are more developed than others. But compared to the northern part of the world, this part of the world, so the southern countries, are less developed than the northern part. It is because the cultures that live in the southern parts of the world do not rely on the scientific method, and they do not rely on work ethics and individualism. Because you guys may say, oh, why individualism and work ethics start to get into this conversation? Well, the the African American Museum, or the African American History Museum, recently posted something at their museum saying that what is whiteness, and they saying that whiteness is when you believe in the scientific method, when you believe in individualism, and when you believe in work ethics. But those things have nothing with whiteness. Those things has nothing with white culture. In fact, white people understood that these three elements are what the human condition needs in order to advance, in order to move forward. And that's what the Asians have been doing. What individualism is simply not the fact that you think just for yourself. Individualism is the fact that you think for yourself in order to help others. What does it mean? It means that if you want to help your family, for instance, escaping poverty, you need, for instance, to work, have a good salary so that you can use that income to help those who are in need. But how can you help others even if yourself is not in a better condition to help them? That's what individualism is. In order to help others, you have to help yourself. And that's what uh, Western Europe understood. That's what the Jewish understood. And that's what the Asian have been understanding now. Today, the Asian culture in the United States is the most advanced culture. Economically speaking, the median income for a Asian household is $83,000, because the Asians have made that shift. If you look, for instance, Asians have been focusing a lot on education. We don't see Asians in the entertainment industry. Maybe there's some, but they're not a lot in the entertainment industry. Asians focus on the scientific method. They focus on education because they believe that it's by focusing on education. When we say education, we're not saying that everybody needs to have a PhD. When we say education, we're saying that getting the marketable skills you need to be competitive in the labor market. That's what it is. You don't need a PhD to be an engineer. All you need is a bachelor's degree in engineering, and you're good to go to get a job somewhere, and then you're fine. So we see, for instance, that Asians are all focusing on education, and that's what the they're the best at the Ivy League schools, and they get all the best grades and all the best scores at standardized tests. Because Asians understood that in order to develop themselves, they need to rely on the scientific method. They need to rely on empiricism. They need to rely on intellectual activities. And that has been the problem with the black community. The black community does not believe in science. I'm not saying every single black person does not. Of course, there are some black people who believe in science, but it is not relying on the scientific method is not a an element that is embedded in black cultural features. It is not embedded in black culture. And that is a problem. That is why poverty remains significantly relevant in black civilization, whether it's in the United States, whether it's in Brazil, whether it's in the Caribbean, or whether it's in Africa. Wherever the black community is, it is the poorest among all. In the United States, the black community is the poorest. In Brazil, the black community is the poorest. Even in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, the poverty rate is above 60%. So 2/3 of Africans, of the African population, is poor, which is ridiculous. And the blacks that live in Europe is the same thing too. So the point is here that in order for a civilization like the black civilization to develop politically, economically, and socially, a cultural shift has to be done. A social maturity has to take off. And that social maturity is to understand and to embrace the scientific method as the bedrock of economic development, as the bedrock of political development, and as the bedrock of social development. I am not saying that all of the sudden black people should forsake their culture. Of course, I understand that tradition has always been a very important feature in black culture. Yes, we believe in tradition. It is part of who we are. But other cultures believe in tradition too, and it doesn't prevent them from using the scientific method, although they believe in tradition. As I said at the beginning of this video, the scientific method cannot solve everything, of course. But in the material world we live in, where technology, science, and intellectual activities are now the way to improve the living condition of people, the scientific method is the only way. Because to deny the scientific method is to simply deny human progress, at least in the material world. I don't know about the immaterial world. I don't know what's going on there. I've never seen, so I don't know. But for what I see, for what I know, the scientific method has been the catalyst to improve the living conditions of the cultures today that are the most advanced. Without the scientific method, the Far East Asian culture would have not advanced the way it has advanced today. Even today, the Indian culture is now relying more and more on the scientific method. Of course, India is a very traditionalist culture. Indians remain strongly traditionalist, but they're not opposed to the scientific method. And today, India is more than ever developing. Education is becoming the main source of development in India. Indians understood that it's by investing in their people, it's by investing in science, it's by investing in education that India is now economically flourishing. That's what has happened in the United States. That's what has happened in Western Europe. And that's what is now happening slowly but surely in South America. So, cultures, I don't believe that cultures, like some cultures, are necessarily above others based on natural distinction. That's not the case. I think it's more a matter of nurture. So, which means that uh, cultures understood the need for something, so they start investing into that thing to improve their social well-being, and that's what Europeans have done. Europe was very much poor before the Industrial Revolution. Uh, it was the same for Asia too. Far East Asia was relatively poor before the Industrial Revolution as well. Because what happened is that during the Industrial Revolutions, uh, Europeans were purchasing goods and services from Far East Asia. So what has happened is that so Far East Asia started to develop also its skills in scientific endeavors to build those stuff that Europeans need, because Europe was always at war. For instance, I don't know if all of you know, but the Chinese were the first to create firearms. They don't use firearms that much themselves, but Europe used it a lot. But the Europeans were purchasing the firearms from the Chinese because the Chinese were the one who manufactured them. So I'm saying all of this for you guys to understand that science is what helps improving the living condition of a people. The scientific method is what helps improving the human condition. Because if it wasn't for the scientific method, we will not have the industrializations that we have today. If it wasn't for the scientific method, we wouldn't have the comfort that the humanity has today. So some cultures, like black culture, need to embrace more the scientific method and rely less on anything that is emotional. By emotional, I mainly mean the entertainment industry, because those industries, they're mainly short term. They're mainly short term endeavors. They may generate income, but the income it generates, it's not on the long term, and it's not everybody that can make it there. Because entertainment endeavors never develop a society. All the societies that were able to develop have developed themselves primarily because they rely on the scientific method, they invest into intellectual and scientific activities. A society needs doctors, a society needs lawyers, a society needs bankers, economists, physicists, biologists, computer scientists. A society needs all of these occupations more than singers, athletes, and I don't know. So yeah, those things. So like as I said, entertainment is a luxury. Science is a necessity. In order to enjoy yourself, you need to have the necessities. But the black culture does not have the necessity and already try to enjoy itself. Even the Chinese, who have now the necessities because they invest so much in science, still do not enjoy themselves. They keep investing, in science and the scientific method and all the rational and scientific activities. That's why today everybody respects China. Whether we like them or not, no one can dispute with the fact that China is today the most industrialized nation in the world. It's a fact. The funny thing is that before 1980, China was relatively a poor country. Under the reign of Mao, they were relatively poor, and today look at them. If it wasn't for the scientific method, China would have not reached the level it has reached today. So it's important for lagging cultures such as the black civilization to invest into science, to preach education and science to the future black generations, because is because those are the ones that will be able to lift the black community to better ends. Those are the ones that will be able to implement the development that the black community has been looking for so long. It's all a matter of choice, I believe. It's all a matter of personal will. I think that by promoting science, by promoting the scientific method and all the rational activities that contribute to the development of the human condition, I believe that that's how black people will be able to one day earn also the respect that they've been looking for so long. But so long as we do not do that, other cultures will keep looking down on black people. The Chinese, specifically, the Asians in general, but the Chinese specifically, have been through that, they experienced that, and today, China is the most respected country in the world. So it could be done. So that was my allocation of the day. I wanted to talk about the scientific method and why it is that important. And yes, I definitely enjoy speaking to you guys about it. And let me know in the comment what you think. And until then, see you soon.